I am Amanda Morse, and I am conducting an interview with Mark Andrew Nice. Natasha Ward is running the camera. Today's date is May 9th, 2017, and we are at the Brimfield Public Library in Brimfield, Illinois. Mark, thank you for coming today and sharing your story with us. I would like to start today by getting a little background about your life before you joined the military. Could you please tell me when and where you were born?
I was born January 25th, 1988 in Peoria, Illinois.
Okay. And who are your parents?
David Nice and Diana Nice. They were from this area. My dad is originally actually from Indiana, but they grew up just around the Peoria area.
And could you tell me how they were employed when you were a child?
For as long as I can remember, my dad has worked for Caterpillar, I believe, right out of high school. He went in to be an engineer and has been working there ever since. My mom, she was a stay-at-home mom growing up. She's had odd jobs here and there since then, but never worked full-time.
Okay. And did your parents or grandparents ever serve in the military?
Both my grandparents did. My granddad on my mom's side was in the Navy, and my granddad on my dad's side was a bombardier in the Air Force. Excuse me, the Army Air Corps. Be proper terminology for the point in time when he was in.
Okay. And did their experiences or stories contribute to your desire to join the military?
Not so much my grandparents. My other family, I've got a cousin who's still currently serving in the Coast Guard. His stories growing up greatly influenced me. Chasing down drug dealers in Florida on speedboats, and the tactical stories I would hear was a major influence. Growing up, my dad and I, we would go to air shows locally here in Peoria. I got to know the aircraft, the way they had operated, the pilots very well, to the point where I could hold a steady conversation with them. And by the time I got done with high school, I had really nothing else going on, no plans for college, so I decided, why not join the military?
Do you have any siblings?
I am one of 5. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a big family.
Are any of your siblings currently serving in the military, or did they previously serve?
None of my other immediate family has served or is planning to serve, as far as I know. We are a very different group. Every one of us has gone our own routes, and I was the only one who decided to go with the military route.
Okay. By my calculation, you were 13 on September 11th of 2001, excuse me, when terrorists hijacked 4 planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. What do you remember about that day?
I believe that was 8th grade. I remember going into my teacher's classroom and hearing something on the radio, and that it sounded like something dramatic had happened, and I honestly had no clue really what was going on until I got home and I saw the news coverage and continued to see it for the next how many days or weeks straight, and still really didn't have a full grasping of what was going on or how my world had just completely changed and how everything that I knew had changed because of that.
Following the attacks, many people felt motivated to join the military. What impact, if any, did September 11th have on your view of the military and your later decision to enlist?
I was one of the people, I think I was too young to feel driven to serve because of that one event. My reasons for joining were separate from patriotic feeling.
Okay. And at what point in your life did you decide to join the military?
Funny story. I was in summer school during high school. I believe it was my sophomore year going to my junior year going to my senior year. And during the course, they brought in different speakers, police officers, recruiters, etc., to talk. And they brought in the National Guard recruiter from here in Peoria. And at the end of his little spiel, he gave us a little pop quiz on the C-130, which is the cargo planes that they fly out of Peoria. Growing up, I loved military airplanes like some guys like sport cars. I would research them, read about them. I was obsessed with them. So at the end of his speech, when he quizzed us on this, I got every single question right. He tried to stump me, I got that right. He proceeded to look at our principal and asked him, how does he know this? And he invited me to come talk to him. Well, the day I went out to see the recruiter, he was out to lunch. But luckily, the active duty Air Force recruiter was there that day, so I ended up signing up with him that day.
I see. And how did your family and friends feel about your decision to enlist?
My mom acted, and I'm pretty sure the same way moms have acted ever since the military has been around. And needless to say, she was supportive, but very upset, regardless of the fact that I was in the Air Force and not joining the Marines or the Army or some combat unit. My dad and the rest of the family was very supportive, though, and they continued to be supportive throughout the whole 8 years that I was in.
Okay. And did any of your friends or classmates enlist too?
My best friend growing up in high school did enlist in the Army afterwards, yes.
At the same time that you did, or?
A year after I did.
Okay. And do you have any idea what kind of motivated him to do that?
I'm not sure exactly what happened. We kind of lost touch being in, during that first year of the military, you spend most of it in training. You spend, 6 weeks or whatever it is for basic training. That constantly changes. And then you go on to your actual schooling for whatever job it is, which can be anywhere from a couple of months to a couple of years long. And then you spend training at your actual base, so it's just constantly training, be caught up, being integrated in the military. And during that time, with all the moving around, I did not keep in touch as well as I would have.
Okay. And could you tell me in which branch of the military you decided to enlist and why you chose that branch? I think we may have sort of covered that, but...
Well, one of the first recruiters I talked to, besides the National Guard recruiter, was a Marine recruiter. I talked to a Navy recruiter, just being nice. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do in the military. I didn't really have a big understanding of what the military does. I don't think most people do unless they've been inside. Originally I wanted to go in as a combat cameraman. I'm one of the crazy people, don't give me a rifle, give me a camera. And somehow over the course of the next couple of months, couple of weeks, I ended up getting pulled into the Air Force. I realized, I really like airplanes. If I join the Air Force, I'll probably see airplanes. And ultimately that's what did it for me.
Okay. And how soon after enlisting did you have to leave for basic training?
When I joined, the Air Force was actually pretty full at the time. They fluctuate between how many jobs they have open. I signed up with my recruiter right after high school, or during the high school, but it took a good almost 6 months for a job to open up.
Okay. And did your family and friends do anything special to send you off?
Not really. My parents had just got divorced that past year, I believe. And so there wasn't a whole lot of camaraderie with them. I was close to my friends and we hung out, but there was no big going away party or anything. That's never really been my style.
Okay. And do you remember how you felt when you left?
Anxious, nervous. We're not really sure what was lying ahead. And, I was going up to Chicago. They had a nice limo for me. That was kind of nice. Flying out from there, I got to basic training. I was the last flight to get into basic training, and that was about 10, 11 o'clock at night. And so normally when you get there, they had the drill instructors ready to yell at you and get you confused and worried, upset. But by that point, everybody was just tired, so they just rushed us through the line, got us processed as soon as possible, and then set us in our bunks. And then we woke up the next day at 4:30 in the morning, and yeah, it was an interesting first 2 days.
Okay. And so what did you expect the basic training to be like? Did it kind of match those expectations? You said those first 2 days were...
Well, I'm like a lot of people, I think, who do a lot of research before going into something like this. And basic training is something that you can never research enough. And it doesn't matter if you research it or if you don't research it, it's going to be the same way. It's where you have a plan going into it, and as soon as you get there, you're yelled at, that plan is out the window, you don't remember anything, you're being told 5 different things, and do this and do that, and you don't know what's going on, you don't know who to talk to, and of course, the first week, you don't know how to address anybody, you don't know how to act, you don't know anything, and so it's kind of a joke. The instructors get on you about every little thing, and their point is to confuse you. They want to break you down. And so going into that, I really didn't. I looked into it and I had read a bunch of stuff, but of course, as soon as the mayhem started, I had no idea what I was doing.
Okay. And where did you do your basic training?
Everybody in the Air Force goes to San Antonio, Texas, Lackland Air Force Base.
And do you have any specific things that you can recall about basic training that really stick with you in your mind? Any particular experience or anything?
There was a lot of experiences. Very interesting stuff. Basic training is about getting into the mindset and working as a team. And once you kind of put away you as a person and adapt the idea that we're in this together and we have to work together, along with learning how the military operates, how to address somebody, the proper way to speak, when to talk, how to act. Once that clicks in your head, then basic training is actually really easy, because basic training is the only place in the military where everything happens on time. After basic training, then the real world kicks in, and you can show up to a place and you might be waiting 15-30 minutes before something happens, even if you show up early. Versus basic training, you get there on time, it happens on time, so the next people can get there on time, it happens on time for them. But there was a lot of different experiences. I remember one time we had this guy show up to basic training. His recruiter must have really not liked him. He showed up with really big curly hair and a t-shirt that had a pot leaf on it. And let's just say the instructors had a good time with him. He did not last very long. There was just a lot of fun when it comes to that kind of stuff, but overall the experience was interesting. Once you really learned your way around, it was kind of actually enjoyable experience. I still keep in touch with a couple of my friends that I had met in basic training that I was never stationed with, but we just kept in touch because you're close quarters the whole time. You go through so much stuff and you learn so much that you really bond during those few weeks.
Can you recall an instructor from your training who was particularly memorable?
I'm really horrible with names, generally speaking, let alone from that long ago.
Okay.
I really didn't have a particular drill instructor that really stood out to me. I had maybe 5 or 6 during the time I was in, because they would swap back and forth, and you would be with one for a little bit, and then we'd have some that were in training as well, so we went through a bunch of different ones. I remember at one point in time, basic training, I had actually got in trouble for something and been sent back to an earlier flight, so I was in basic training for an extra week than most people were. And typically when you do that, you're looked down upon, and it's like, oh, he's scum, he messed up. And for some reason, my drill instructor of that flight actually treated me better. And for example, when somebody who got injured and went to the hospital, they always needed an escort, and they would pick me to go. It doesn't sound like much, but you got ice cream, and you got to hang out and talk to nurses, and you weren't in basic training mode during that brief period of time. So it was nice, and I think the reason why is because the flight I was in beforehand was a lot more strict, and so that kind of carried over, the discipline from that carried overwards, and so I was maybe perhaps a step ahead of the people that were actually in the flight.
So different instructors have slightly different...
Slightly, not a whole lot. I mean, there still has that mentality of you have to break your troops down and then build them back up, but some just, it's like high school teachers in the sense where everyone has the same goal, they just have a different way of going about it.
Did you receive any specialized training?
As in career specialized training?
We can go that route, sure.
Well, typically you'll do your basic training, which is 6 to 12 weeks, depending on what the Air Force chooses for it. It's fluctuated. And then after that, you'll go into your specialized training. Mine was in services, so I did everything from cooking, fitness, hotel, including mortuary affairs and honor guard. We had a wide range of stuff. And it was actually at Lackland Air Force Base. So I when everybody went to their separate bases, I got in a bus and just went to the opposite side of the base. But we learned a wide variety of stuff, and it was interesting because every base you went to, you had an opportunity to do something different.
And were you, the specialized training that you received, is that a choice on your part as far as
It was,
where to
well,
go?
back when you're with a recruiter and you signed up, the way it worked was you picked, I think it was 5 jobs that you would like. And if one of those jobs popped up open, then the recruiter would sign you up and send you off to basic training under that job.
Okay. How did you adapt to military life? Was there anything particularly difficult to adjust to? Or?
It did take quite a while for me to kind of just get used to the rhythm of it, being, every place 15 minutes, making sure, your dress and appearance was always spot on, every little thing they had rules and guidelines for, making sure your haircut was, the certain length, making sure your clothes were pressed, making sure your boots were shiny, and back in the day when we actually wore black leather boots, they had to be shined and polished. A lot of people in the military nowadays don't know that we actually had to by hand polish those. So that was something that we had to do, especially in my job where I was out in the field as a grunt, and so we had to make sure our uniforms looked extra nice, extra crisp and clean, because we were dealing with generals and colonels on a regular basis. So we were constantly under scrutiny, and dealing with the discipline of just everyday military life did take a while, but after a while it kind of sunk in and clicked, and now it's become just routine habit for me.
In what unit did you serve?
Unlike a lot of other branches, the Air Force, as a single person, you can transfer from base to base quite often, and your unit will change versus where if you're infantry in the Army or the Marines, you're going to stay with that one unit for quite some time, deploy together and move around together. Us in the Air Force, you could be stationed at one base and deploy and be part of a whole different unit when you're deployed, and come back and be part of that original group. The time I was in, my first base was Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, where we worked with satellites and intelligence. And then after that, I did a stint in Germany for 2 years, where I worked in the post office and communications. Spangdahlem Air Base was a fighter wing, so we had fighter jets out there. And then I went to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, where we have the B-2 bombers. It was the 509th Bomb Wing, the bomb wing that was responsible for the bombings in World War II. Actually, we dropped one of the atomic bombs, which is pretty cool history in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was deployed, I went to Al Dalfar Air Base, UAE, which is the 380th Fighter Wing as well. So we had a wide variety of aircraft out there that we dealt with, on top of foreign nationals, special forces, incoming and outgoing units that were going downrange to like Afghanistan. So the time I was in, I had a wide variety of units that I worked with.
You shared before this interview that although you were not officially a photographer for the Air Force, you were asked on multiple occasions to do some photography work. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure thing. When I was deployed, photography was just a habit of mine that I was doing. I was bored, and I took my camera with me when I was deployed because I just figured I'd have some fun doing photos. There was an event on base, I believe it was a 5K, which the military does almost religiously. I took some photos, and Public Affairs, this group who normally does photos and videos and media and news outlet type stuff, had heard I did photos, and they wanted a copy. They saw that I was actually pretty decent, so they coordinated with my commander, and then whenever we had a VIP, a guest, or band show up, it was my responsibility to photograph them. And then those photos would be used for the USO, which are the ones that were hosting the events, as well as the base paper. So I got to meet a wide variety of guests and celebrities that would come there, and photographed them, see them interacting with the troops, see them getting the tour of the bases and stuff as well. And so I got to meet bands. I got to meet Chef Irvine when he was out there for a whole week. He did a lot of meeting and greeting with the troops from around the base, and it was a really cool experience.
Do you have a favorite person that you met while doing that?
I would say it was definitely Chef Irvine. He was a super cool guy. He brought his whole crew of like 5 people. He was there for a week. He did not only did he cook multiple meals for us, he did fitness classes as well. It was a really cool guy to work with. His whole crew was really down to earth, and I spent the whole time with him doing photos. I even did a personal fitness photo shoot with him and his trainer at the end, and it was really cool being able to see somebody who you see on TV, and he's the kind of guy who plays big and tough on TV, and then just to meet him in person, realize he's a really cool guy who really cares about the troops. And he was there teaching us tips and tricks in the kitchen, because my official duty when I was deployed was a cook, and I just did photography on the side just in place of cooking. So when I wasn't doing photos, I was back in the kitchen, and he would teach us tips and tricks on stuff in the kitchen, some really cool recipes and stuff. And when I wasn't doing that, I was following around with the camera and meeting his crew, and it was a really fun experience.
You mentioned earlier that you had served in Germany and UAE. How did your service abroad differ from your service while you were in the United States?
When I was in Germany, I worked in the post office, which all post offices on bases outside the U.S. are run by military. It's still the USPS, it's just run by military folks, where you have to go to a special training, which is a joint school at, I believe it was Shaw Air Force Base. And, no, it wasn't. It was Fort Jackson, South Carolina, right next to Shaw. Everybody from all the branches went there to train for, I think it was like a month or 2, and then you'd go off and do your postal duty. And it's a volunteer service. It gives you a chance to go abroad if you've never been abroad. And so I served over there working in the post office, and it really wasn't too much different than my normal job, since it's a customer service based type of job. So it was kind of an easy transition into that. But being overseas in Germany, I got to work with Germans who from the local area that worked at the post office with us. So that was really interesting. Didn't really work too much with the German military. They had their own bases, so that we weren't integrated very well at that base. But dealing with the culture was very interesting. When I was deployed, we had a lot of people coming and going, different branches, different countries, different services, all because people would go from downrange to Afghanistan. They would stop by our base on their way back home, or on our way to Kuwait. And so we dealt with a wide range of people, and the responsibilities and the work ethic when you're overseas is a lot higher. The bar's set a lot higher, because there's a lot higher possibility of something going wrong, whether it's a terrorist attack or just a domestic terrorist attack, if you will, a gunman or something like that. It's more likely to happen in Germany versus in the States. And where I was deployed, we were surrounded by hostile countries, and so there was a high risk of something happening. And so you had to know your stuff, and you had to constantly be on it and be ready for something to happen.
What sorts of interactions did you have with the local citizens?
Deployed, I didn't get a whole lot. We had people there from, I believe they were from Nepal, that were our cooks. So I dealt with them on a daily basis. Really nice people, great cooks. Off base, I only got to go off base once. They had a certain system where you had to get a pass to go off base, and I never got approved for it at the time I was there, so I didn't go off base as much as other people did. I got on base one time, went to a festival. It was really interesting seeing the festivals in the Middle East versus in the U.S. Real similar in a lot of ways, where you have the different vendors and booths and kids running around with different toys and balloons and people playing music. Of course, it was different style. Their music is very different, and instead of seeing horses like you would around here, you had camels, and the way people dressed was slightly different. The interaction wasn't quite the same, but it was cool being a photographer and seeing other people walk around with cameras and seeing them photograph people like you would here. It was a very interesting experience.
What kind of friendships did you form while serving in the military?
Very unique relationships in a way, because you deal with so much stuff and so much strain and so much stress, and you have to put up with so much stuff while you're in the military. I think the people that you become friends with, the friends on a much deeper level than you would, say, just at college or just at work, where you're friends because you see them a lot, maybe, and so you have a couple of things in common, and you might go out for drinks and hang out, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're in the military and you're living a complete different lifestyle, I think you have a much deeper understanding, much a love for your friends more than you would normally.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Just in general, it changed a lot. In Colorado, I went snowboarding a lot. It was really great. They had a deal where if you had a pass to a certain resort, they would take a van out there in the morning, let you snowboard all day, and then you can come and they'd drive you back for like $20. And so that was a relatively inexpensive hobby to do, and you got to see the mountains. And I was in Colorado Springs, so we were literally just a couple of minutes from the mountains. So we'd go hiking and biking and just go to concerts and stuff a lot. When I was in Germany, I would just randomly drive to a town, not knowing where I was going, just to experience it. You saw a lot of vineyards out there, a lot of castles, a lot of war museums and stuff, a lot of older culture that you don't really see in America, which is one thing I miss about it. Everything in America is all the suburbs are kind of the same stores, the same houses, but there you go to an old town. These towns have been here, World War I or older, and it's just seeing that culture, that history was really interesting. And I'd go to concerts when I was in Europe too, and a lot of the same bands I saw that were just on tour. And those experiences were similar but different, which was really interesting. I used to go to the gun range with my friends. It was a good way to kind of blow off steam and bond and just have fun. And of course, it was responsible. There was a lot of people who have, don't agree with guns and stuff, but we always did it responsibly. We would take out new troops to the gun range and just kind of, bond with them, get them to, talk to them and open up, and it was a fun experience as well. And every base had something different to offer. When I was deployed, I was constantly shooting photos. I'd go from work to editing, to sleep, wake up, and go back to work. And when you're deployed, you're working 12 hours, 6 days a week. So that was pretty much my life.
Do you have a particular favorite place where you were deployed, or they all just...
Well, I only had the one deployment I was in, and I actually liked it a lot. I'd go back if I had the opportunity, because I liked the lifestyle of working hard. And then over there I got a lot of cool opportunities to meet people, and doing photography for the military was really unique. I got a lot of photos that most people don't have because they don't have the access. And a lot of people in the military, not a lot, but there's some people in the military who do photos who, to them, it's just a job, and they didn't enjoy as much, where to me, I saw the art and I saw the opportunity of really cool photos, and I love shooting it.
Can you recall any particularly fun or funny experiences during your time in the Air Force?
It's a long time to think about. I mean, I had a bunch of fun times all over, going to concerts with friends and just going out exploring, and not any particular one stands out to me. Just a lot of, 8 years, you kind of have a lot of experiences during that time. I remember during basic training, one of my good friends who I'm still friends with, we just got out of the gas chamber where you experience tear gas for the first time. And afterwards, it's a way to test your chemical gear. Because it's not toxic, it's just really annoying. And then you have to change out your chemical gear, and for some reason they're making us change in a tent that didn't have any lights. And you're in there with 20 or 30 guys trying to change out your uniforms with no lights. And my friend comes up out of the tent, and he goes up to the drill instructor and he's like, "Sir, I can't find my pants." And extremely embarrassing for him, because he kept having incidents like that. And it was hilarious, but I kind of felt bad for him. But yeah, that was definitely one thing that stood out.
Did you ever experience any tense or dangerous situations during your time in service?
When I was deployed, I was lucky enough not to be deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq. I would have if I had the opportunity. I was deployed to a R&R type of location where somebody who's been to Afghanistan or Iraq would go to the base I was at and rest for a week or a couple of weeks and then go back to the suck, if you will, and go back to the desert living. My base in particular wasn't very dangerous. We didn't have to worry about marrying or Kevlars or anything every day. I know that the area that we were at had the potential to be very dangerous. UAE is located right underneath Saudi Arabia, and so Afghanistan was just north of us. North Africa was just below us, and so there was a lot of countries around us that had weapons that, rockets and such, that could reach us in a matter of minutes if something did happen. And so that was constantly in the back of our mind, and that's one of the reasons that we worked so hard to make sure that everything was always spot on and that we were ready to go at a moment's notice.
How did you stay in touch with your family and friends back home?
I got lucky. I was deployed at a time when you could make phone calls. We had internet and Wi-Fi accessibly. Not being in Afghanistan or Iraq, that wasn't always the case for people out there. And back in the day, you couldn't make phone calls as well as you could now. But I had a disposable phone when I was out there, and I was able to call back home if I wanted to. I could check Facebook and email as well. So I was very fortunate when it came to that.
What made you decide to return to civilian life?
When I was deployed, I had talked with a bunch of people, and I know that at the time the Air Force was offering a deal where they would pay you X amount of money to get out, and I'd been paying on my GI Bill, and it's been well paid off, and I knew that if I got out under the certain GI Bill, they will pay you X amount of money for rent while paying for your schooling. And I decided, well, I could spend 4 more years in the military, essentially flipping burgers, working in the kitchen, and maybe go up in rank, maybe not. Or I can get out, spend 4 years, go into a career that I want to, and be doing a job that I want. Thought about that, thought about the benefits, thought about, well, getting out, I would leave the steady paycheck and the military lifestyle and the traveling and everything, but then again, I would be doing what I wanted to on my own time. And it wasn't the easiest choice, but once I put everything on the table and I looked at it, I decided this is what I want to do. I would rather get my degree and do what I want versus living a good life, but working essentially fast food in the military wasn't what I wanted at the time. And so I decided to get out. I put in my application, I got approved, and as soon as I got out, I signed up for school, and I actually just finished my last day of my associates today. So, and I go on next month to SIU to work my bachelor's.
Okay. Was there anything particularly difficult about returning to civilian life?
The lack of a steady paycheck was the benefits and stuff. Not everything. The military is a small community in and of itself. Everything that you have in civilian life is located on base. You got your hospitals, you got your mechanics and jobs and places to shop. Everything's confined to a small base. In the event that you had to lock down, everything's going to be on base and available for you. And getting used to civilian life where people aren't as disciplined, where people aren't as you agree to meet somebody at a location. In military, you're there early. You're 15 minutes early or you're late, and that person, they're running late, and they could be 20 minutes late because they didn't get ready until 2 minutes beforehand. So getting used to that is still a challenge. It's still adapting to it, especially going back to school with a bunch of people who are fresh out of high school. It's complete night and day difference.
Is there anything you enjoy being able to do as a civilian that you were not able to do while you were in the military?
Doing what I want to when I want to is really nice. I mean, I don't have to worry about, for example, in the military, your hair had to be a certain length. And if you weren't, for example, for guys, if your hair was touching your ears like it is here, you get in trouble. You get paperwork. I don't have to worry about that here. If I want to get a haircut, I'll go get one. If I don't, I don't have to worry about it. You have to keep shaved. If I feel like having a lazy day and not shaving, then I don't get in trouble. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you live with that pressure after a while, it kind of builds up. And so nowadays it's one of those things like, yeah, this is definitely nice.
Okay. What have you done since separating from the military? I know you said you've gone to school.
I've been in school essentially, I signed up as soon as I got out because that was my game plan. I've worked a couple of different side jobs here and there while still focusing on school. My hobby for photography has really taken over. It has now become my major, which originally was marketing. And then, like most people, I switched majors a couple of times trying to figure out what was right for me. Now I'm going into photography with a minor in film because I've discovered this is not only what I enjoy, this is something that I'm actually really good at, and people seem to tell me this is something I'm good at. So I'm going to go with what they say and follow with this. But since then, I still continue my military habits. I volunteer constantly. I was fortunate to be part of a brand new nonprofit group out of Galesburg called Shave for the Brave, where they get big burly men with beards to shave off their beards, and the money to go towards Honor Flight, which sends veterans to DC so they can see the memorials and everything. And I met the group when they were brand new. I think they'd been at it maybe a year by the time I met them. And last November, they raised enough money to fly an entire flight of veterans to DC, and so I got to go with them, and that was an experience that was just really enjoyable and humbling. Being able to see that all the hours that we've put in, all the countless hours I put in photographing and editing the photos for them, all the events that I went to finally paid off, and being able to see people who, for maybe the first time, went to DC and see the memorials that were raised for them. And we had folks that were there from World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, all on one flight together, and it was a really interesting, humbling experience.
How have your experiences in the Air Force influenced your career and life goals?
Being the discipline has been the biggest thing. Knowing how to act professionally is something that they should honestly teach in schools. Learning how to dress right, how to address people, how to show up on time, and just small stuff like that really pays off. A simple saying thank you to somebody for doing something really makes a big difference. That sort of discipline, that lifestyle has helped a lot, and I think that's what people look for when they want to hire a veteran, and they see that. And regardless of the job I'm doing, whether it's a part-time job doing something customer service most people will just blow off, when you treat it the same way you would in the military, you get treated better as an employee. You know, people, they respect you more, and customers respect you more, and your bosses respect you more, and that kind of helps you climb the chain in life outside the military as well.
How did your military service impact your feelings about war and the military in general?
Before joining the military, when I thought of war, I thought of, you know, the footage from Desert Storm or from Vietnam growing up, or the war movies. And then joining the military, you see a complete different side. Unfortunately, it's my generation, the ones that really brought up PTSD. I lost my best friend to it, but my friend from high school who joined, he was in the Army. He ended up taking his own life after he was in. It's a hard thing to work with, and you see that side of the military, you see that side of war, and you realize it's not on the, you know, it's not just in the combat field. It's not dodging bullets and landmines. That there's a whole different aspect, a whole different dimension to war that most people don't know about, most people will never experience. It's more publicized in the news nowadays, which is great, but you'll never truly be able to experience it and know what it's like. And whether I'm pro-war or against war, it doesn't really matter. I think a lot of people have started to understand that supporting the troops doesn't mean supporting the war, which is a big thing that we've learned since the Vietnam War, and since helping those folks out with the Shape for the Brave. Is something I've learned as well, is that they didn't have that opportunity when they were growing up. They served the military the same way as I had, if they were, and not, if not, they were drafted and they were forced to serve it, and then they were treated like scum in return. But I'm glad that our country has finally turned around and learned from that lesson.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who might hear or view this interview?
I'd say that if you have the opportunity to serve, even if just for 2 years, that you should do it. Everybody says that freedom isn't free, and I hate that cliche saying, but you will learn more in those 2 years of service than you will in 4 years, 8 years of college, than you will traveling anywhere else. The discipline you get, the small skills that you will learn during that 2 or 4 year enlistment, whatever the minimum is, whatever you want to sign up for, do it and see what it's like. And if you don't like it, that's fine. The military is not for everybody, but there's a chance that you're going to learn something during that point in time, and there's a chance that you might like it and you might want to continue. And it's a great career if it's for you.
I know that you mentioned that photography is something that's certainly carried over, something you really enjoy. Do you still enjoy cooking?
I still cook, yeah. I still fancy myself as a chef and enjoy the culinary arts. I still like to play around with that as well. I also worked in the fitness center, and so I dabble with that a bit as well and make sure to stay up with my fitness when I can.
What kind of food was a typical military meal like?
Well, if you talk to anybody in the Army or the Marines, they're not going to talk highly of their food. Unless you ask them about the Air Force base they went to, then they'll talk highly about the food. So everybody wants to talk down about the Chair Force until they've been deployed and they've stuck eating MREs, which are meals in a bag that are dried sealed, and they're not bad when you first have them, but if you're living off of them constantly, then an actual hot meal is going to be your saving grace. And that's one thing I learned when I was deployed, was the meals that we were cooking, that we were slaving for over the kitchen, that we had become used to. These folks who had just been in Afghanistan for months on end, these were the first hot meals they had, the first real meals. And especially the troops that were combat, the ones that were special forces, they really appreciated it. And that's made a difference unlike any other before. We have people in there. I remember one day we had a master sergeant who was that's a really high-ranking person in the Air Force, complaining about the texture of our mashed potatoes. And I was polite and I addressed it and everything, but I was thinking, I'm like, are you serious? This is what you're complaining about? And the next day we had a gentleman in there, and he was just stopped dead in his tracks, staring at our selections of beverages and candy bars that was rival any grocery store that you'll see. And it's the special forces, the guys who are in combat, that truly appreciate it and that made the big difference.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed that you might like to share or bring up?
I think we covered everything. It was, I had a lot of good times in the military, learned a lot. Since getting out, I don't regret getting out. There's aspects of it that I missed, and I might have gone back for it, but I definitely think I made the right choice. So.
Great. Well, we thank you for your service to our country and for taking the time to share your experiences with us today.
Thank you for having me.